Welcome to the Sales SOS podcast, where we answer your sales distress calls. I'm Liz Hyman, and each week I'm joined by your crew of seasoned sales experts who have navigated these waters and come out victorious. So if you're ready to turn your sales distress into sales success, you're in the right place. Let's dive into today's topic. Welcome to this episode of the Sales SOS podcast. I'm Liz Hyman, and I am here with your Sales SOS podcast crew, Renee Bigelow, Mike Simmons, Bryn Tillman, and Daryl Prell. And we're talking about scaling. How do you scale and not end up with total chaos? In our last episode, we were talking about what are the things that get in the way of scaling successfully. And this episode, we're going to dig into the people side of it, because I think when you're scaling sales, that's probably the hardest part. So we do optimize the talent that we have, and then we have to hire for growth. And we need to figure out how to do that. Bryn, tell us what you got.
So all I can say is relationships. That is what matters with scaling. So here's what happens. We have sales reps who are out cold calling. They're relying on marketing to get in leads when everything they need is one introduction away. And this is so important, right? So taking inventory of your connections, whether it's LinkedIn, in your CRM, in your contacts, really just take a look at everyone that you've worked with, that you've brought value to, and start really mapping out who they know. And when you're connected on LinkedIn, you have the ability to do this. But that to me is the fastest, easiest way to scale, because you now have introductions and referrals from folks that already have, that liked you, loved you, have experienced you, and you're coming in at a high level of credibility, and you get conversations much faster, and those opportunities close much faster. They don't even shop you because you're coming in through referrals. So that for me is the best way to scale any business.
I love that the first thing I wrote down, because this is what I do. I write everything down. You know, our wonderful Liz goes and says, here's the topic. And then I get there and I write. And the first thing I wrote down relationships, which is so wild. And then the second thing I wrote down, though, in relationship to that, is over communicate. So if you're going to actually, because the topic, of course, is how do we optimize our talent and then hire for growth? And that's a two-parter. The first one is how do we optimize or retain or make the talent we have that's working for us, stay? Because when you hire for growth, there's change. Not everybody deals well with change. But if you include them in the process, then they feel that they're part of the solution. So that's where the over communication comes in. And over communication means, this is the opportunity for you, but this is how things are going to change. But this could be a negative for you, just so you know. Are you still on board? So let's talk about it. Let's get that all out. One of the things I would go ahead of, Bryn talked about referrals. I'll say something really stupid, which is offer bounties. Because, if I offer a bounty for a referral, after 3 months or a certain milestone is hit, you get paid, $1,000 or $5,000 or whatever it is. Then chances are they're going to refer their better colleagues as opposed to just any colleague. So there we go. Relationships, include them part of it. And that's all this is about, the first part of the equation, which is how do we optimize talent we have so we don't lose them. So then they help us to the second part, which we haven't talked about yet, is how do we hire for growth?
So let's think about, for a second, culture. Because sometimes what happens when we start hiring is culture changes. And you may have somebody who's accustomed to being able to sort of do whatever they want, the way they want it. No one has really questioned them as long as they get results. And now you're going to start implementing a new sales culture where there are more guide rails and more rules and more accountability, perhaps. And so we really need to think about, as we're developing the talent that we have to function in this new environment that we're creating, how are we keeping that environment one that they want to be a part of? And frankly, if you want, as Daryl said, for your employees to recommend new employees to hire, you better have a sales culture and a company culture that people want to be a part of. Because if you have a very negative sales culture that's super hyped on closing deals and not relationships, and nobody ever gets thanked, and it's super negative, high stress environment, unless people are compensated through the roof, they're not going to invite their friends into that, and they're probably not going to stay if it becomes more toxic. So just wanted to throw that out there. Mike, do you have something you wanted to share?
Yeah, I think one of the things that people have to ask themselves and answer is, what is culture? Like, what is culture inside our organization? Is it culture by design, or is it being allowed to happen for convenience and happens organically? And how do you bridge the gap there? My definition for culture is how we do what we do. And I think if you ask people what the culture is or what their definition of culture is, and start asking a couple of people inside your organization, you're going to find out that you've got a lot of different perspectives, and it's going to look a lot like that, that story about the 5 blind people describing an elephant.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk specifically about, so we have a team that we now need to optimize. So to me, the starting place is, what is my team doing well, right? So let's go to the team that I have, whether it's me or one salesperson or a couple of salespeople, whoever we already have in place, managers, salespeople. Let's go back to them before we start adding and figure out, what are they doing? What are they doing well? What is the drag that they encounter every day? And drag is all of those things that interfere with their ability to do their job, which is selling, right? So what is the drag that they're dealing with every day? And if I'm going to multiply this, if I'm going to recreate this for new salespeople, what is it exactly that I want to recreate? So before I can start hiring, I've got to figure out what's working, what's not working, and how do I want to define the new job going forward?
Yeah, the thing that I'll add is just my process for doing it, and it's 3 questions. It's what's working, what's not working, where are we stuck? Like, if we understand those things, then we can get to a point where we start to determine, what do we want to start doing, what do we want to stop doing, and what do we want to keep doing? So start, stop, continue. And yeah, you happen to be on a call with a bunch of consultants who do this stuff. So we kind of follow, we have all of our own different version of how we go through and do it. And if you ask those questions around what's working, what's not working, where are we stuck, and simplify, get a understanding of the specific jobs to be done by the specific role inside the organization to achieve the results you're looking for, then you'll get a better perspective of where your opportunities are. And don't do this in a vacuum. Ask your people. They're committed to the success of the business if they're still in your business and have been with you for this first stage before you move into this next stage.
Okay, so we want to multiply what's working. We do not want to multiply what's not working, right? So if I have a sales rep that's currently wasting 2 hours a day on things that interfere with them selling, what I don't want to do is add 3 more people. So we're now wasting 6 hours a day on, right? So we don't want to multiply what's not working. We want to multiply what is working. So our first job is to identify what works. And then we have to map that job. What is this job? What is this sales process? What does this person do? Now, the next step, if we're going to hire for growth, we have to hire people who can do that job. Do not make the mistake that I'm going to hire a salesperson and I'm going to put out a requisition or a job description that says this salesperson is going to prospect and qualify and write proposals and close deals and manage a channel and grow our existing accounts, right? So what you're sure to get is either a liar, a rare unicorn, which to date I have not met one, or
nothing. You're not going to get answers that you want. So be really thoughtful about what is this job that we're hiring for? What is the sales process? What does marketing do? Who does the prospecting in conjunction with marketing? Who writes proposals? Who closes deals? Who grows account? Like, who's doing what? And is it realistic for one person to do all of this? And if you are expecting one person to do all of this, what tools are in place to support them to do all of this? But if you've ever read a sales job description, do you just read it and go, that's ridiculous? First of all, I need a good communicator. Well, why do you even have to write that down? First of all, and second of all, why have you added all of this nonsense that isn't humanly possible, right?
Well, do you even know what a good communicator
No.
is? Like, is communication working inside your business? Right. It may or may not be. The other one that's, and there are people listening to this. There are people who've applied for positions that look like this. The answer is not going and taking somebody else's job description and then sticking it on your website.
No.
You know, like, come on, people, like, be realistic about what you're trying to accomplish with this specific role. And if you're not clear on it, how can the person coming in be clear? And most of the time when you're talking about scale, the step that you're moving to is you're moving from being very general, a generalist approach to the roles that you have inside your organization, to starting to be more specialized. And as you go through it, it's going to be tough, because you're going to have to tell people they're not going to do that work anymore, or you're going to have to determine what you're going to eliminate from certain roles. So the scale is not about creating more generalists. It's about creating specialists, at least from my perspective and what I've seen work.
So I think, and I love that, Mike, I think what I hear and what I think about kind of piggybacking off of that is that you need to make sure that you know your scale plan that we talked about in a previous episode. Like, what are you going to do? Are you going to be expanding markets? Are you going to be upselling current clients? What is your scale plan? And then you hire for that role, right? You go, okay, this is the direction, the momentum. Even if you're expanding your current relationships, there's a different personality than a hunter. There are different qualities to hire based on how you're looking to approach this. There's also different skill sets based on where you want to go. So let's say you want to go your current offer in a new market. For me, I don't care if someone knows my offer. I want someone that knows the market I want to get into. So I'm going to hire for relationships in the new market. But if I'm doing more offers in an existing market, I probably want to leverage relationships that I already have. So someone that I can bring in and say, this is my right-hand gal. And, and I can create relationships with the ones that I already have, because I'm expanding in that same realm. So when you're hiring, you have to really know what your goal is, so you're hiring for the right purposes.
I'll add in that I think I just went through this in a strategic planning session. There's a lot of, in a scale plan, there's a lot of, when we track what's going right, what's not going right, we're going to assess performance, right? It's one of the steps that we're doing, is we're assessing performance so that we can figure out the who attached to the what, right? Like the who's going right, essentially. And then what are they doing that's achieving success? And when you're scaling, the trap in that is much of what you have been doing isn't what you're going to do. So the other trap in that is the way that a lot of people are assessed can be about their potential for the future.
And in sales in particular, that needs to be a different metric. I just brought this up in a sales meeting, that in many departments, you're looking for your future leaders, right? You're looking for people that you can move up into management and leadership and how you grow. In sales in particular, often your top salespeople are not people that you want moving up into management, nor do they want to move up into management. You are often looking for mini superstar ICs that can work as a team. And that individual contributor, so the composition is part of it. What we want to be, to Bren's point, not just what markets we're going into and the skills or things related to that, but we also need, in a scaling situation, everybody needs to contribute more than their individual tasks, right? We need to contribute as a team. So we want to see some people that have some of the skills that we're going to need to grow because they help us with a path that hasn't been cut. They're our trailblazer. I have a company that doesn't have a sophisticated CRM right now. So we have one person on the team who has worked with it. That peer learning that's going to come across, like when everybody else pushes back, why do I have to do this in the CRM? That one person who knows what benefit it is to the salesperson is going to be huge. When we try to build out the automations, that's the one person on the sales side that can say, I know our process here, and this is what our sales team is going to need. We need those skill sets, right? And then the two others that I think are really, really important is, and it goes to that what we've had versus what we'll need, is a lot of your top contributors in sales, before you do some sort of scale, are often going to get a moment, at the very least, of a scarcity mindset. If you've been the only salesperson and you're bringing other salespeople in, right? Or if you're changing how we've sold it and now I've got to change how I do it, whatever, like that, even if it's just for a moment, there's that scarcity versus growth. And every person that we're bringing in really needs to have growth mindset, because we're going to change. Things are going to look different, right? And we need them to see that as opportunity. And then the second part of that is forgiveness and permission. And I think this goes a lot to that entrepreneurial salesperson that you mentioned, Liz, versus, being part of a system or a team as we get bigger. Where your tolerances are in growth and scarcity is just as important in this kind of scaling situation, where our forgiveness and permission lines are. Because we're going to have to do things that we've never done before, and you're going to need some people to be more forgiveness, not permission, because otherwise you'd lose opportunity, right? And then you also need people who are going to be more permission than forgiveness, because we can't be wild, wild west anymore because we're trying to create a system. So I think all of those kind of together, that organizational composition, the what we need for the future, skills, mindset, culture, all of those things, and that forgiveness, permission, and growth versus scarcity is just as important as like words on a job description and tasks and skills that you've done in the past.
No, I agree with all of that. I think that's really important. And I think it's one of the things that makes it hard when you're starting to try to hire a lot of salespeople to sort of balance. I think one of the mistakes that people make when they hire their first couple of salespeople or their first sales manager, they'll make the commitment that, oh, this team is going to grow, we're going to scale, and you're going to be able to be the chief sales officer when that happens. But we don't even know if that person has the right skill set and mindset, and we haven't seen them interact in a way that can convince us that they will be in the right person for that job when it comes up. So be really thoughtful about when you're hiring, making sure people know that there is opportunity for growth, or there will be, but not committing to somebody before you know what the world looks like when it's time to hire that leader. Mike, did you have something?
Hire for what you need now, not for what you need tomorrow. And the reason why I say it that way is because you don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. You don't know how tomorrow is going to change. You do have an opinion or perspective of what you need today to create that opportunity for change. And it's when you attempt to hire for what you need tomorrow, a lot of times the people who are trying to predict what you need for tomorrow haven't done those things. So it's hard for them to assess the talent pool to determine whether or not you're bringing in the right person. Not only can they talk about how good they can do this thing or whatever it was, but can they actually do the thing? Because there's a difference between people who know about buses, people who've ridden on buses, people who have driven buses, and people who fix buses, and people who build buses. They're all different roles. But they can describe, if you're someone who's only ridden on a bus, someone could describe to you how to fix a bus, and you wouldn't know if they were right or wrong because you don't have the right skill set to be able to assess that. And this is not about buses. This is about hiring sales people, but it applies.
So let's talk about this in more depth, because in the last episode, Daryl said, I think it was Daryl. Mike, did you say it? That people say, don't let the CEO hire any more salespeople. I think Daryl said
Daryl story. Yeah.
And what we know and what I've experienced is that often HR people do not know how to hire sales. And one of my favorite examples of it was working with a company, and the woman who was the head of HR said, we don't hire anybody in this company unless they stayed at their last job for more than 3 years. And well, since the average life cycle for a salesperson in any job is 2, you're going to be hard pressed to use that criteria. So what are some of the other mistakes? Why is it so hard to hire good salespeople?
They were a top seller at another company is one that I see. Like, I don't understand. They were a top seller at company A. I hired them. Why are they not performing here?
And it was usually they were a top seller at a big company like Google or Microsoft, and I have a small business and they're not succeeding here.
You're a top seller in a small business and it's a bigger business, like the mismatch.
The mismatch.
The big one is they had more resources. So whether not necessarily the size of the company, but what their job, to your point, there's like multiple jobs in most sales positions. And if they had external resources helping them with more of those jobs versus if they have to handle those on their own, that's the big mismatch that I see. Or vice versa, if they're used to doing it on their own and have new people they have to work with.
Hang on one second, Brad. Hang on one second. So I think I've told you this story before, but and I've heard similar things before, but this guy was so blatant. I said, look, you're used to working in a company where you have a lot of support. This is a much smaller company. It's more of a startup, and you really aren't going to get a lot of support. And he was at a big company. And he said, you think we have support? We've got nothing. We get virtually no support. And this was a big name company with a huge sales organization, sales ops, sales enablement, right? Managers and coaching. And I just looked at him and I thought, you're just going to drown, right? Because he had no idea what it meant to not have support. Bryn, what were you going to say?
I don't remember. Wait, what did Renee say?
About the mismatch.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure it had something to do with that. So what I have seen, and this kind of goes off exactly what Renee has said, when you're interviewing, ask them, how much did marketing provide leads for you? How much did you do your own hunting? How much did you network in conferences? And did you go to events? And where did your business come from? So just being that top seller, we have to make sure that what made them successful aligns with what we're doing, right? Like that's that piece that Renee was talking about, but kind of bringing it full circle. Find out how they sold. How did you prospect? How did you start first conversations? Did they come from relationships? Did you inherit an account base? I can't tell you how many people inherit an account base and they become incredibly successful sales reps, but when they go to the next job, they're starting from scratch. They don't have necessarily the skill set that, so that they, blew away all their numbers is, based on way different resources.
Or did you have a gift market versus with headwinds? With tailwinds versus a tough market with headwinds, right?
Right.
Mike, you got something?
Yeah, I just from a practical perspective, when you go through this process, and we've already talked about specific skills and being really clear around what those skills are. What are the things that people need to do in order to be successful based on your understanding of the market and of the people of the success that you've had in your business so up until this point, and some of the changes that you're making. Because again, we're going from generalist to specialist typically when we're in this scale mode. When you have that list of skills, make sure that your hiring process has an assessment component where you're assessing those skills. And this is the 3-step process that I use for hiring, and it works pretty well. The first one is, I just want to know, it's going to sound a lot like a sales process. I want to know, can I see a scenario where we would work with each other? I'm just going to validate that there's a chance. That's it. Like, that's all I want to do in that first conversation. And typically the first question I ask to get an understanding is, what questions do you have for me? That's going to reveal everything that I need to know about how much work they did to prepare for that interview.
Because that's exactly how much work they will do to prepare for their sales calls.
Perfect. So then then if they pass the validation step for me, see a scenario where we work with each other, the second interview that I do is a scenario interview. And this is one where I put them in a situation, a scenario where they have to demonstrate skills. And in that scenario interview, I expose them to other members of the team. Like, I bring in people that they're going to interact with who have to play a role so that this scenario aligns with what is something that they will see or do in their operating environment where they demonstrate those skills. In that scenario, once it wraps up and I've seen those skills in whatever time period and whatever thing it is that we're doing, and typically if it's an account executive, discovery, an initial discovery call is a really good thing to do because they don't need to know a lot about your business in order to be able to do it. You can demonstrate curiosity, you can show how they manage a conversation, how they manage multiple people in that kind of operating environment. The next thing I do is I provide some very direct coaching as part of that scenario. And what I'm assessing for there is, are they coachable? Do they get defensive? How do they react? And I'm direct. You guys see it in these things when we're ever on these things. I don't mix words, and I'm intentionally trying to get people to get defensive. And it's not because I want to trick them. It's because I want to understand, are they going to be able to deal with the stuff that happens when all of this gets really, really hard? Because it will get hard. And then the third stage, so if they make it through the first stage, validation, second stage, capability assessment and coachability. And then the third stage is they get to meet the owner or the senior executive or whoever the person is. And that's where you get into the kind of like the more detail of, hey, is this person really going to be the right fit for the organization? And each time that they move through a stage, just like salmon swimming upstream or your deals moving through your sales process, the probability of sale or probability of success increases. If you do not have that in your environment, you're committing malpractice, and you will get into a situation where you mishire people, and then you will get into that situation where you have to let them go or they decide to exit. And either way, you're going to slow yourself down. So have a process, work the process, and then look at the data associated with it to determine if it actually works. Anyhow, hopefully that's helpful for folks.
Yeah, I think the mistake that gets made so often is this person tells a great story. Sell me a pen. If you can sell me a pen, then you must be a great salesperson, right? If somebody asked me in a sales interview to sell them a pen, I would probably walk out. So we want to know, can this person do the job? Not do they tell great stories? Not do they can they, tell you that they exceeded their sales goal. And by the way, 60% of salespeople do not hit their sales goal. So if 100% of the people you interview tell you that they exceeded their sales goal, either you have magically found the right people or they're lying to you, right? 100% of people did not hit their sales goal. In fact, 60% of American salespeople do not. So when you're interviewing, how are you going to figure out, other than asking them, did you hit your sales goal, whether they know how to hit a sales goal, whether they know how to fill their funnel, whether they know how to prospect, whether they know how to do the things that they will need to do in order to be successful. Any last thoughts on hiring?
Just
All right.
reinforce. I'll reinforce it one more time. And I know I sound like old man shouting at clouds type thing, but like this, have a process, work the process. If the process is yielding the right results, keep using that process. If the process is not yielding the right results, figure out how to adjust the process. Don't make it any more complicated than that. It's hard. The person you're talking to wants a job. The person who's talking to that person wants to fill a seat in the organization. You both have these things that you want. And especially in hiring sales roles, you can get yourself into a situation where you can sell yourself on the idea that this person is going to be an amazing fit because of X, Y, or Z. Look for the positive stuff. We all have biases that we apply. So have a process and then have controls in there to help make sure that your process is working. And you'll know in your data, if you're one of those organizations who goes out there and hires 5 people just to see which 2 or 3 work, stop doing that. You're impacting people's families. You're impacting your customers. You're impacting your team.
Yeah.
So that's my ad.
I have 2 tips to end on, because we did cover these in our whole conversation, and they're very practical. One is have kind of an org chart in mind for where you're headed in growth. I'll give a perfect example on this. As a company scales, one of the top things that you'll see happen is breaking off account management and sales, right? So if you know that's coming in a few months, or if you have an idea that maybe this person has good inside sales experience, you have both of these positions, maybe you can put them on the inside sales or account management. You want to see if they're applying for outside sales. Have your org chart in mind, because you're going to run into a lot of really good talent in these interviews, and talent's kind of hard to find. So you might be very myopic on who you're hiring, but if you think about like many of those things that Mike talked about like what felt good, did this feel like a good person to work with? Did they have some good skills? Don't immediately reject without looking at the rest of the org chart. And then the second is, if you still want to reject, but you still had a lot of positive feelings about that person, I have some clients that pass leads, talent leads back and forth. Maybe one doesn't have quite the experience. We interviewed 5 salespeople. There were 3 in here that were great. They're not going to fit our model, either it's our comp model or our market or whatever. And they're sharing those talent leads back and forth and referring them back and forth. Get yourself in one of those situations too, because it's really rough out there on the talent market to find what you need, your flavor of a unicorn, what you need to help you scale, what you need to fit your culture, what you need for those skill sets, has relationships, all those. So get yourself one of those buddies where you can kind of pass along some talent leads as well.
So, and I have just one final thought on this, and that is smash all of the stereotypes you have about what you think a salesperson is, right? We tend to hire people who are like us. We tend to think that salespeople are brash and obnoxious and bold and overly confident. None of those things are necessarily true. We have a stereotype that men are salespeople or make better salespeople than women. The data tells us something different altogether. We also know that if you interview one woman, the chance that you will hire that person is very, very low. If you interview 2 women, the chance that you hire that a woman increases by 60%, regardless of how many other people you hired. So kind of put aside your stereotypes and interview people who have the skill sets and the experience that you need, as opposed to fitting some mold that you have in your head about what a salesperson is. All right, let's wrap that up. And we're going to dive into our next episode. So join us for our next episode, because we're going to talk more about process, but we're going to go sales process, not hiring process. So thanks for joining us for this episode of the Sales SOS podcast.
And that's a wrap for this episode of the Sales SOS podcast. A huge thank you to our experts for throwing us a lifeline with their insights. We hope that episode has equipped you to navigate sales leadership with confidence. Never miss an episode. subscribe to your Sales SOS podcast on your favorite platform. If you have questions, comments, or topics you'd like us to explore, join us live on LinkedIn every second Friday, or share your questions on LinkedIn or YouTube. Until next time, keep sailing toward your sales goals.